Let's talk about COP27, an 11th hour agreement setting up a fund to assist countries hardest hit by the climate crisis. But will it be enough to keep the 1.5 degree temperature target alive? Was this a watershed or simply more hot air? And even as South Africa secures funds to manage a move from fossil-fueled energy to renewables, will the transition be just, or will it leave communities and industries dependent on traditional sources in the cold? And what of the West's sudden reversal of its own energy requirements? For example, we're in boom times with respect to our coal exports to the very countries demanding that we drop fossils. Joining us now for a discussion on this is the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs, Barbara Creecy. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. You've hailed the summit as a great success.
Good morning, Bongani, and greetings to all your listeners. Yes, I think that the decision on setting up the fund on loss and damage comes after a 30-year battle. And although, as you correctly point out in your introduction, we still have to go through a year of discussing the sources of finance and who will benefit, it does represent a significant turning point, particularly for countries on the African continent that have limited fiscal space, are extremely vulnerable to climate change, and have already seen their economies decimated by the impact of extreme weather events.
Critics are saying, but hang on, there are no commitments as far as cutting emissions by the biggest polluters. Of course, money is there for poor countries, but isn't that rather like, I don't know, paying so I can assault your children?
Look, Bongani, you raised a really important point in your introduction. Are we seeing a situation where developed countries are returning to fossil fuels and putting pressure on us to reduce emissions so that they can use what's left of the carbon budget in the world? And this was an issue that I have engaged on with developed country partners when I went to Berlin and also at COP27. I've also done some reading on the matter, and first of all, I think it's important to say that the developed countries have expressed commitment to keeping the 1.5 goal alive, and research by the International Energy Agency indicates that CO2 emissions will decline in Europe even this year. At the same time, there is a 7% increase in coal use, and that's because they are not using Russian gas. It's too expensive. Russian gas, as you know, is also a fossil fuel. But what the research indicates is that while there may be a short-term boom in coal, there is a massive renewables program which has been speeded up. The EU, most EU countries are already about 45-50% dependent on renewables. They are putting another 50 gigawatts online. And all of them have said to me, yes, this winter and next winter will be bad, but then the renewables will be on stream and we won't be dependent on fossil fuels at all in the future.
But surely, Minister, we have to have a commitment, and I realize I'm in a sense, I'm putting this question to the wrong person, but in terms of how meaningful all of this is, we have to deal with the elephant in the room. I mean, all 27 COP meetings, beginning with the first in Berlin in 1995, have ignored that. That being, of course, a clear target for reducing fossil fuel use. I mean, ultimately, all of this talk about 1.5 degrees, critical decade, is meaningless if we don't have that as a firm commitment.
You're right, Bongani, but I think it's also important for our economy to understand what are the opportunities in this climate change that we're seeing. First of all, we have energy deficiency, and recent reforms in the regulatory environment are allowing renewables to come on stream in our own country. Secondly, we have incredible strategic advantage because we have enormous amounts of sunshine. We're the 10th sunniest country in the world. And with the rest of the world having increasing appetite and interest in green hydrogen, We have the Fischer-Tropsch technology through Sasol. This is a technology that allows us to turn carbon into liquid fuel. It's a very significant global advantage. And in due course, it's going to be in high demand internationally. Morocco, Egypt, Namibia are already getting into the green hydrogen race. Green hydrogen, as you know, is part of our JETS investment plan. And we think that there are risks. You are absolutely correct. But there are also significant opportunities, and we have to get into those opportunities early on so that our economy that is desperately in need of new growth sectors can benefit.
Well, let's talk about what we can control then in terms of those opportunities, right? 1.5 trillion over the next 5 years. That's the president's plan in terms of our just energy transition commitments.
Yes, President did hand over the plan to the partners Monday, 2 weeks ago. At that time, he did say to them that there isn't enough grant financing, and he also said that we will be looking for additional partners so that we make the financial circle bigger. I did have an opportunity to have some bilaterals with some developed countries while I was at COP27. While I can't yet announce any concrete developments, I can say that there is further interest. And I suppose at the end of the day, the climate finance that is required by the whole world is going to have to come about through reforms of the international financial system and in particular reforms of the multilateral development banks so that they are less risk averse, more prepared to take first loss, and also, of course, that there is a greater grant financing component.
Yeah, that was exactly what the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, called out, right? What she called out an imperialist double standard in terms of how these financing agreements work. But criticism here has been, Minister, that there's been a lack of consultation about this plan because, of course, all of this financing comes from loans.
Bongani, on Friday, before we went to COP early in November, the President handed the plan over to the Presidential Climate Commission. And we're now working with them to set up a series of engagements with business, organized labor, civil society on the plan itself. This is going to be central to guide the implementation plan. Obviously, from here, what we've got to do is we've got to appoint a high-level project manager. We've got to get into the implementation. And the Climate Commission says that they think they can complete this process by mid-February. So I think that that is going to be very important, and it's central to our just transition commitment, that those directly affected must be part of the solution and, of course, in due course, must be direct beneficiaries.
Does that suggest aspects of it are reversible or at least open to being changed?
Yes, it's a big picture plan, and obviously what we've got to do from here is to develop a concrete project pipeline. We're already, as you know, working on Komati as the proof of concept project, and that involves not only repurposing the power station, but it involves a training center for reskilling and upskilling workers in the coal value chain. And I think that we're going to use that proof of concept project to say, there's some other very aged power stations that are due for mothballing. How do we repurpose those? What new jobs will the workers who are in those coal-fired power stations undertake? But even more importantly, what new industries are we going to establish in Mpumalanga so that in the broader coal value chain, communities are not left out in the cold?
1.5 trillion rand, Minister, and most South Africans' eyes will begin popping out, right? Think PPE, think arms deal, think state capture. That's what we immediately start to think about. How do we ring fence this money to make sure it is, it doesn't go into corruption or fruitless and wasteful expenditure? How do we ring fence this money?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to understand that not all this money is coming to the state. I mean, this is the estimation of what both public and private investment would need to be, and a significant portion of this would be private investment in renewable energy, changes by the OEMs in the production of electric vehicles, and of course this massive project that Sasol themselves have around the development of green hydrogen. So this is not all going to be state money. The $8.5 billion US dollars, which is the money coming from our partners, it's not cash on the table. It's money that's linked to specific projects. It's on a pay-for-performance basis, and there's some very tight conditions attached. Of course, human beings are human beings, and unfortunately, greed seems to be a problem in our country, but I think that we shouldn't envisage that this money is going to be in a piggy bank somewhere where everybody can help themselves.
Does that also answer those critics who point out that we ditched nuclear at more or less a similar estimated price tag, but of course we've made this decision even though we said we couldn't afford nuclear?
Well, my understanding, and I'm obviously I'm not the energy minister, but my understanding is that the nuclear build program was in the government space. This energy transition and the green transition is a whole of society transition. So there's the Eskom component, but what I've explained is that there are three components in the JET IP. There's electric vehicles, and that's 100% run by the private sector. There's the green hydrogen that's run by Sasol, that is a private company. So I think if we understand this as a state project, where the state is taking the loans and the state is having to pay back, then of course everybody must be worried about the fiscus. But this is a whole of society transition. There will be thousands of transactions. Some of those transactions will be with development banks, some of them will be with private banks, some of them will be with philanthropic institutions, some of them will be with commercial lenders. So we're talking about a societal transition. This is not about Eskom.
Barbara Creecy, appreciate your time. Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs. They're reflecting on the highs and lows, perhaps, of COP27.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.